Somewhere in the Egyptian desert, buried under rubble for nearly 4,000 years, are the remains of the most ambitious engineering project the ancient world ever attempted. It took 10,000 workers, more than a decade to build. It collapsed before it was ever used. And for the next 1,000 years, nobody tried again. Let's go back to the beginning, because the story of the world's first dam is also the story of the world's first engineering disaster, and the two are inseparable. The year is roughly 2600 BC. Egypt is at the height of the Old Kingdom, the same era that produced the Great Pyramid of Giza. The civilization is organized, ambitious, and increasingly capable of moving enormous quantities of stone with nothing but human labor, copper tools, and rope. The Nile is the lifeblood of everything: agriculture, transport, trade. And the flooding of the Nile, while essential, is also unpredictable. Too much water at the wrong time could devastate a harvest. Not enough could starve an entire region. The Wadi Garawi is a dry desert valley about 30 kilometers south of modern Cairo. For most of the year, it holds almost nothing, a parched, rocky corridor cutting through the limestone plateau. But in the season of the great rains, a flash flood rushes through it with enough force to move boulders, strip vegetation, and dump enormous quantities of silt into the lowlands below. And someone, at some point, looked at that valley and thought, what if we stopped it? What they built there is now known as the Sad el-Kafara, an Arabic phrase meaning the Dam of the Pagans, named not by the people who built it, but by medieval Arab travelers who discovered its ruins centuries later and had no idea what they were looking at. The original builders left no inscriptions, no records, no explanation of purpose. Everything we know about the dam, we've had to reconstruct from the rubble itself. In 1901, a German geologist named Max Blankenhorn was surveying the Wadi Garawi when he noticed thousands of tons of cut and uncut limestone blocks scattered across the valley floor, as if something massive had simply detonated. He documented what he found, published his observations, and moved on. For decades, nobody paid much attention. It wasn't until the 1970s that a team led by German archaeologist Friedrich Hinkel conducted the first serious, systematic excavation of the site. And what they found changed how we understood the scale of what had been attempted. The dam was not a simple stone wall. It was a full-scale engineering structure, approximately 113 meters wide at its base, tapering toward a crest that rose roughly 14 meters above the valley floor. The core of the dam was built from loose gravel and rubble, the material that was easiest to move in enormous quantities, faced on both the upstream and downstream sides with cut limestone blocks, stacked carefully to hold the loose fill in place. At the base of the structure, the builders placed gravel-filled wicker baskets to act as a foundation, an intuitive but ultimately insufficient response to the engineering problem of building on unstable desert floor. Hinkel's team calculated that the total volume of material moved to construct the dam was somewhere in the range of 100,000 cubic meters. With an estimated workforce of around 10,000 laborers working in organized shifts, supported by a logistical operation providing food, water, and tools to thousands of people in a remote desert location, the construction likely took somewhere between 10 and 15 years. This was not a minor project. This was a national undertaking, organized and funded at the state level, almost certainly directed by the same administrative machinery that built the Great Pyramid complexes of the same era. Here is what we also know from Hinkel's careful measurements of what remains. The dam was never finished to its intended height. The upstream face shows evidence of incomplete work, sections where the limestone casing was still being laid when whatever event ended the project occurred. Some researchers have argued this means the dam failed during construction rather than after completion, destroyed by a flash flood before it was ever fully operational. Others argue the incomplete sections represent post-failure repair attempts that were eventually abandoned. The disagreement has never been fully resolved because the dam left no written record and its builders left no explanation. All we have is the stone, and the stone doesn't say when it fell. So what went wrong? The dam had no spillway. This is the detail that changes everything. A spillway is the controlled overflow channel that allows excess water to escape the reservoir without overtopping and destroying the dam itself. It is, in modern engineering terms, the single most critical component of any dam design. Without it, when the reservoir fills beyond capacity, the water has nowhere to go except over the top of the dam. And water moving over the top of an earthen or rubble-filled dam does not simply flow harmlessly downstream. It erodes, it cuts, it pulls the facing stones loose, then the fill behind them, then more facing stones, accelerating in a cascade that turns a controlled structure into a catastrophic breach in minutes. The entire process, from first overtopping to complete structural failure, can happen in under an hour. The flash floods of the Wadi Garawi were not gradual. They were violent, sudden, and enormous in volume, exactly the kind of event that would overwhelm a reservoir with no overflow outlet in the shortest possible time. Whether the dam failed during construction, or shortly after completion, or the first time it was ever fully tested by a major flood, we don't know with certainty. What we know is that the downstream face of the dam shows catastrophic erosion damage consistent with overtopping. The structure didn't slowly degrade, it was destroyed in a single event. Here's what makes this story harder to dismiss as simply a primitive mistake. The builders of the Sad el-Kafara were not inexperienced. They were operating within a civilization that had already demonstrated the ability to plan and execute multi-decade projects at extraordinary scale. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built within roughly the same century, involved the precise alignment of over 2 million stone blocks to tolerances modern engineers still find remarkable. The people who built the Sad el-Kafara were not guessing randomly. They were applying the best engineering knowledge their world had to a problem their world had never solved before. And that is the thing about first attempts that gets lost when we look back at them from the comfortable distance of 4,600 years. They want primitive failures made by primitive people. They were the leading edge of human knowledge in that moment. The point beyond which nobody had ever gone, where no manual existed, no precedent existed, and every decision was made without the benefit of knowing what the outcome would be. There's a detail in Hinkle's excavation report that stays with you. Embedded in the gravel fill of the dam's core, archaeologists found fragments of pottery, animal bones, and occasional tools, the ordinary debris of a years-long working camp. Thousands of people lived and worked in that valley for over a decade, eating their meals, breaking their tools, leaving the small traces of daily life inside the structure they were building. They didn't know the dam would fail. From their perspective, they were building something that had never existed before, for a civilization that had commissioned it in a valley that had never been tamed. They had every reason to believe it would work. The dam failed. Egypt waited 1,000 years before trying again, and when they finally did, the next dam had a spillway. The Sad el-Kafara was not the last thing built without a spillway. That mistake was repeated independently in other cultures, in other centuries, on other rivers, each time with similar results. The history of dam engineering is not a straight line of increasing competence. It is a series of failures that taught the next generation one specific thing they hadn't known before. Every dam that exists today carries in its design the accumulated lessons of every dam that failed before it. The Hoover Dam has a spillway. The Three Gorges Dam has a spillway. Every major dam on Earth has a spillway. They have spillways because 4,600 years ago, a workforce of 10,000 people in a desert valley in Egypt built one without one. And the valley remembered. There is something in that 1,000-year gap that speaks to how seriously the ancient world took the lesson. Not the lesson of the spillway specifically. The technical solution was eventually rediscovered, independently, many times over in many cultures. The lesson of the attempt itself. That the first time anyone builds something that has never been built before, the outcome is not guaranteed by ambition or by effort or by the scale of the workforce. The outcome depends entirely on what you don't yet know.
And in 2600 BC, in a dry valley south of Cairo, the engineers of the Old Kingdom found out exactly where the edge of their knowledge was. The rubble is still there.